The September sun hung low over the Appalachian peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood orange. Benjamin Wolfe sat in his handmade rocking chair on the cabin porch, the wood worn smooth by 15 years of evening contemplation. At 52, his hair had gone silver, his beard thick and shot through with gray, but the scar remained. That jagged line running from temple to joy, a souvenir from Gettysburg that marked him as a man who had seen the worst of what men could do to one another. In his weathered hands, he held a leather-bound book. The cover was cracked and faded, the gold lettering barely visible. But he knew every word embossed there. Blackwood Ridge Church, Financial Records, 1890 to 1892. His grandson Thomas sat on the porch steps, 14 years old, with his mother's dark hair and his grandfather's gray eyes. The boy had been asking about the book for weeks. Tonight, with the whole family gathered inside for supper, Ben had finally brought it out. Thomas watched the old book with the fascination young boys reserve for relics that smell of adventure. "Grandpa, what is that?" Ben's voice came low and steady, the kind of voice that had learned to waste no words. "This is the thing that nearly killed me 15 years ago, and it's also what gave me everything I have now." He opened the ledger carefully, showing Thomas page after page of numbers, dates, transactions. Names written in careful script, money changing hands in amounts that made no sense unless you understood what you were seeing. October 1892. I was living alone on this mountain. Had been for 7 years. Thought I'd die up here by myself, and I'd made peace with that. But then one night, a moonless October night, I heard someone fall down the ravine. Thomas leaned forward, eyes bright. "And you found Grandma?" Ben nodded slowly. "I found a woman dying in the leaves, holding this book like it was more precious than her own life. She wasn't your grandma yet. She was Sister Grace Hartley, a nun running for her life because she'd discovered something that powerful men wanted buried." He turned the pages, let Thomas see the evidence of crimes committed long ago. This book proved that a preacher everyone trusted was stealing land from the Cherokee people. And your grandmother, a small woman who'd never fired a gun or spent a night in the wilderness, decided to fight back. Thomas's voice came quiet, awed. "What happened?" Ben looked toward the cabin where Grace was preparing the evening meal, her laughter mixing with the voices of their children and grandchildren. At 43, she still moved with the grace that had first caught his attention. Still had that fire in her eyes that said she'd never stopped fighting for what was right. "That's a long story, boy. You'd best settle in, because this isn't just about a book and a chase. It's about a man learning to stop running from his past, and a woman learning that courage and fear can live in the same heart." He shifted in his chair, the leather of the book creaking as he held it up to catch the fading light. The story starts with a chase through dark woods, with men on horses hunting a woman they'd been paid to kill, with blood and terror and a fall that should have ended everything before it began. Ben's eyes grew distant, seeing not the peaceful mountain evening before him, but a night 15 years gone when everything had hung in balance. "Sit down, Thomas. This is going to take a while, and you need to hear it, because the men in our family need to understand something important. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting. It's choosing to fight when running away would be so much easier." The boy sat, and Ben began to speak. And as the sun set over the mountains, the old man's voice carried them both back through time to a night of violence and fear when a nun clutched a stolen ledger and ran for her life through forests that showed no mercy. The story of how everything changed began like this. October 1892. The Appalachian wilderness stretched dark and endless under a sky that held no moon. Sister Grace Hartley crashed through the underbrush, her black habit torn to rags, blood running from a gash above her left eye. In her arms, pressed against her chest like a drowning woman clutches driftwood, was a leather-bound ledger. Behind her, the sound of horses pounded through the night, heavy hoofbeats crushing dead leaves, men's voices cutting through the darkness like knives. Sheriff Owen Drake's voice rose above the others, and Grace could hear the fear buried under his authority. Fear of what would happen if they failed. Fear of the man who'd given the order. "Find her. Don't let that woman get away. Reverend Ashford wants her dead. No witnesses. You understand me. No witnesses." Another voice, younger, eager. Deputy Miller. "She's heading toward Morrison Creek, Sheriff. There's a ravine there, deep one, 20 feet down to rocks." Grace heard the words, and her heart seized for one terrible moment. Morrison Creek. the place her father had warned her about since childhood. The ravine where more than one hunter had fallen to his death in the dark, where the drop came sudden and the rocks below showed no mercy. But behind her came men with guns, men who'd been paid to make sure she never spoke of what she knew. Ahead was the possibility of death. Behind was the certainty of it. She chose possibility. Her feet flew over the uneven ground, stumbling on roots that rose like grasping fingers. The mountain laurel tore at her habit, the thorns finding flesh beneath the cloth. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred with sweat and blood and the terror that threatened to freeze her limbs. The ledger bounced against her ribs, solid and real. Evidence. Proof. The only thing that could stop Reverend Thomas Ashford from stealing 2,000 acres of Cherokee land. The only thing that could expose years of fraud and theft and corruption wrapped in the cloth of righteous authority. She'd found it by accident, had been cleaning the Reverend's private study when she saw it lying open on his desk, had seen Chief Gray Bear's name there among the numbers and grown curious because she knew the Cherokee leader by reputation. A good man, an honest man trying to protect what little his people had left. Grace had read the entries, had understood what she was seeing. Sale of land. $20,000 paid by the railroad, only $5,000 reported to the Cherokee, $15,000 vanishing into Ashford's private accounts, signatures forged, documents altered, theft dressed up as business, and when Ashford had caught her reading, when his round, genial face had gone pale and then red with rage, when he'd called for Sheriff Drake and she'd heard him say those terrible words, make sure she doesn't survive. She'd run with the ledger still in her hands. Now the ground disappeared. Grace felt the earth vanish beneath her feet, felt the sickening lurch of free fall. She screamed once, tried to twist, tried to grab something. Anything. The ledger flew from her grasp, tumbling into darkness. Her body struck the rocky slope and began to roll. Branches whipped her face. Stones tore her hands. The world became a chaos of pain and motion and the certainty that she was going to die. Her head struck granite. The impact rang through her skull like a bell. Then nothing. Nothing but darkness and the smell of wet earth and her own blood. Above on the rim of the ravine, Drake and his 4 deputies reined in their horses. The animals danced nervously at the cliff edge, sensing the drop, wanting to be anywhere but there. Deputy Carson leaned forward in his saddle, trying to peer into the darkness below. She fell, Sheriff. I saw her go over. Drake's voice came tight, uncertain. Anyone see her hit bottom? Deputy Turner shook his head. Too dark. But from that height on those rocks, nobody survives a fall like that. And even if she did, she'll be dead from the cold before sunrise. It's October. Temperatures dropping to near freezing. Drake sat his horse in silence, staring down into the blackness. His conscience, what remained of it after 4 years of taking Ashford's money, wrestled with his fear. Fear of what Ashford would do if Sister Grace survived. Fear of what his daughter would think if she ever learned what her father had become. He thought of Sarah, his beautiful Sarah, 14 years old with her mother's Cherokee features and his own blue eyes. The daughter he'd hidden for years because the law and society would never accept a child born of love between a white sheriff and a Cherokee woman. The daughter Ashford had discovered and now used as a leash around Drake's neck. Find the body and find that ledger. Miller shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking. Sheriff, that ravine is 30 feet deep in places, full of thorns and rocks and God knows what. We'd need daylight and ropes. Take us a week to search it proper. Drake bit his lip. Ashford wanted proof, wanted a body in the book, but tonight in this darkness, they'd find neither. We ride back. Tell the Reverend Sister Grace is dead. We'll search for the body come morning. He turned his horse to the others following. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the forest, leaving behind only silence and the whisper of wind through the trees. In the darkness below, Grace Hartley lay motionless among the fallen leaves and mud. Blood seeped from the wound on her head. Her breathing came shallow and ragged. The cold crept into her bones, stealing what warmth remained. Above, the clouds parted just enough for starlight to touch her pale face. She looked dead, but her chest moved. Barely. The smallest rise and fall, life clinging on by the thinnest of threads. The ledger lay 3 feet away, leather cover muddy but intact, still holding its secrets, still waiting to speak truth to power. Dawn broke cold and gray over the mountains. the kind of October morning that warned of hard winter coming. Benjamin Wolf stepped out of his cabin into air so crisp it made his teeth ache. 6 feet 3 inches of lean muscle and old scars. His hair, dark honey, shot through with premature gray, hung past his shoulders bound with leather cord. His beard grew thick and wild, untrimmed for months. The scar from Gettysburg bisected his face like a canyon carved by violence. At 37, he moved through his morning routine with the efficiency of a man who'd spent 7 years perfecting solitude. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. In the wilderness, carelessness meant death. First, the rabbit snares. He'd set 5 traps the previous evening along the game trails he knew better than most men knew their own homes. 3 held rabbits. He dispatched them quickly, a single cut across the throat, letting the blood drain before hanging them from the cord over his shoulder. No suffering, no waste. Near the 4th trap, he found bear tracks, fresh. The paw print stretched 4 inches across each claw mark, distinct in the soft earth. Male black bear, maybe 400 pounds. The tracks couldn't be more than 3 hours old, probably made just before dawn. Ben committed the location to memory. He'd avoid this area for the next 2 days. Give the bears space to move on. In 7 years alone on this mountain, he'd learned the most important rule of wilderness survival. Respect the predators. They were here first. He continued to Morrison Creek, his Winchester Model 1873 carbine held loose and ready in his left hand. The rifle held 15 rounds of .40 ammunition. He could load it in darkness and hit targets at 200 yards. It had saved his life twice. Once from a cougar, once from a man who'd thought a mountain hermit would be easy prey. At the creek, Ben knelt on the smooth stones and filled his water skin. But he didn't drink directly from the stream. That was how men got sick, got parasites that could kill them slowly over weeks. He'd seen it in the war. Soldiers drinking from streams polluted with upstream corpses, dying later of bloody flux. He poured the water through a cloth filter, then added 3 drops of whiskey to each skin. The alcohol killed what the cloth missed. An old trick he'd learned from a Cherokee scout named Two Hawks who'd fought beside him at Chattanooga. As he capped the water skin, he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the gurgle of the creek. A moan, low, human, in pain. Ben froze, every sense suddenly sharp. He'd heard moans like that before. Wounded animals made similar sounds. A bear with an infected wound, a deer with a broken leg. They were dangerous, unpredictable, driven mad by pain. But this was different. The cadence was wrong. This was human suffering, not animal. For a long moment, he stood perfectly still, wrestling with a choice he'd been avoiding for 7 years. The choice between involvement and isolation, between helping and walking away, between being the man he'd once tried to be and the hermit he'd become. He thought of Daniel Cooper, 19 years old, best friend Ben had ever had. Thought of Daniel's voice calling for help while artillery shells rained down at Gettysburg. Thought of his own feet running away, terror driving him like a whip. Thought of Daniel's body 3 hours later, cold and accusing in death. 7 years Ben had lived with that memory. 7 years telling himself there was nothing he could have done. 7 years failing to believe his own lies. Not again, he said aloud to the empty forest. Not this time. He followed the sound into a thick stand of mountain laurel. The bushes grew dense here, their branches tangled together. He pushed through branches, scraping at his face and arms. There, half buried in wet leaves and mud, lay a woman. Her clothing marked her immediately. Black habit now torn nearly to shreds. A nun, from St. Mary's Church in Blackwood Ridge if the style was right. Blood matted her dark hair where a 3-inch gash had opened her scalp. Her face was gray-white, lips cracked and bleeding. Hypothermia. She'd been here all night. Ben knelt beside her, setting the Winchester within easy reach. His large hands, scarred from years of hard use, moved with surprising gentleness as he checked her injuries. Field medicine learned the hard way, watching men die in the war from wounds that should have been survivable. He pulled her eyelids open, checked her pupils. They contracted in the light. Good. No major brain injury yet. He felt along her ribs, pressing carefully. Nothing broken. Checked her legs. The left ankle was swollen badly, but when he manipulated it gently, he felt no grinding of broken bone. Severe sprain, painful but survivable. Her core temperature worried him most. Her skin felt like ice. Her breathing came too shallow. She'd been lying in near freezing temperature for hours. Much longer, and hypothermia would kill her more surely than the fall. As he examined her, his eyes caught something else. 3 feet away, partially hidden under leaves, lay a leather-bound book. He reached over and picked it up, brushing the mud from the cover. Blackwood Ridge Church. Financial records. He flipped it open. Page after page of handwriting. Transactions, names, money. Numbers that told stories if you knew how to read them. He saw Chief Graybear's name and paused. The Cherokee leader was known throughout these mountains, an honest man trying to protect his people from the endless encroachment of white settlers in their hunger for land. This book was important. Important enough that a nun had been carrying it through the forest in the middle of the night. Important enough that she'd held on to it even while falling down a ravine. She'd chosen the book over trying to catch herself, and that choice had probably saved her life. Both hands grasping at air meant nothing. Both hands clutching a heavy object meant the kind of stability that could turn a deadly tumble into a survivable roll. Ben looked from the book to the woman and back again. Then he looked toward Blackwood Ridge, visible in the valley below. Smoke rose from the church steeple. The town he hadn't visited in 7 years. The town he'd left behind when he finally accepted that civilization was more savage than any wilderness. Someone had been chasing this woman. Someone had hurt her. Someone wanted what she carried badly enough to hunt her through the night. And every instinct Ben had developed over 7 years alone told him to walk away. To leave the book beside her and pretend he'd never found either. To go back to his cabin and his traps and his carefully maintained isolation from the violence and betrayal of the human world. But he couldn't, because every night when he closed his eyes, he saw Daniel Cooper's face, heard Daniel calling his name, watched himself run away while his best friend died alone. 7 years running from that memory. Maybe it was time to stop. Without a word, Ben stripped off his deerskin jacket and wrapped it around the woman. The leather still held his body heat. He lifted her as easily as if she were a child, adjusting her weight against his chest, supporting her head to keep it stable. He tucked the ledger into his belt. Then he began the climb back to his cabin. 45 minutes through terrain that would challenge most men even without carrying an unconscious woman. But Ben Wolf knew these mountains like he knew his own heartbeat. Every rock, every tree, every hidden path where a man could move unseen. As he walked, the woman stirred, once her eyes fluttering open without focus. She whispered something, her voice barely audible. "The book. They'll kill me for the book." Ben's voice came low and steady, meant to soothe without waking her fully. "You're safe now." Her unfocused eyes tried to find his face. For just a moment, consciousness surfaced enough for her to realize she was being carried by a stranger. A massive stranger with wild hair and a scarred face who looked more beast than man. Then her eyes closed and she went limp in his arms again. Ben kept walking, his boots finding purchase on stones and roots with the sureness of long practice. The sun climbed higher, warming his back. By the time he reached the cabin, morning had fully broken over the mountains. He shouldered through the door into the space he'd built with his own hands. 12 by 16 feet of solid pine logs, a stone fireplace he had mortared himself, shelves holding traps, knives, ammunition, dried meat, and carefully labeled jars of medicinal herbs. Deer hides covered the floor and walls. Bear fur served as blankets. The space smelled of wood smoke and leather in the wild. Ben laid the woman on his bed, the only bed in the single room. He'd built the frame from hickory and stretched deerskin across it, padded with layers of bear fur. It was surprisingly comfortable, warm and soft. Then he got to work. Fire first. Ben built up the flames until heat filled the cabin, driving out the October chill. The woman needed warmth more than anything else. Hypothermia killed as surely as any blade. While the cabin warmed, he set water to boil in his cast iron pot. The water had to reach full boil and stay there for 10 minutes minimum. Anything less, and you risked infection from whatever invisible creatures lived in creek water. Next, he went to his shelves and selected the herbs he needed. 7 years of trial and error had taught him which plants healed and which killed. The Cherokee scouts during the war had shared their knowledge, teaching him what their grandmothers had known for generations. Yarrow for stopping blood. The white flowers dried to a gray powder that he could mix with water to form a paste. When applied to wounds, it caused the blood to clot faster than nature managed alone. golden seal for fighting infection. The bright yellow root, ground to powder and mixed with honey, created a poultice that prevented the festering that killed more men in war than bullets ever did. Willow bark for pain and fever. The inner bark stripped from young branches boiled to make a bitter tea that calmed suffering and brought down dangerous fevers. The Cherokee called it nature's gift to the sick. He worked with practiced efficiency, grinding herbs in his stone mortar, mixing them with honey and boiled water, preparing poultices and teas that would give the woman her best chance at survival. When the water had boiled long enough, he let it cool to just above body temperature. Hot enough to clean, not hot enough to burn. Then he began treating her wounds, the head wound first. He used clean linen cloth boiled earlier that week for just such purpose and carefully cleaned away the dried blood. The gash looked worse than it was a truth about head wounds that he'd learned early in the war. The scalp bled like a stuck pig from even minor cuts, making every injury look fatal. This one was 3 inches long but shallow. The bone beneath wasn't cracked or dented. He applied his yarrow and golden seal poultice, then bandaged it with clean linen, wrapped firmly, but not tight enough to cut off blood flow. The ankle next. He made a splint from 2 straight pieces of hickory, patted them with soft cloth, and wrapped them in place with leather strips. Tight enough to immobilize the joint, not so tight that it would cut circulation and kill the tissue. As he worked, the woman stirred again, consciousness rising from wherever pain and trauma had driven it. Her eyes opened wild with fear at first, then gradually focusing on him. She saw a giant of a man kneeling beside her bed, scarred face, wild beard, hands that looked capable of breaking her in half. In the dim cabin with fire casting dancing shadows, he must have looked like something from a nightmare. Her voice came out a terrified whisper. "Who are you?" Ben didn't look up from wrapping her ankle. His voice came flat, emotionless. A man long out of practice at comforting anyone. Still, it wasn't an answer, but it was all he offered. She tried to sit up, gasped as pain shot through her head and ankle. "I need to eat." One word, a command, not a suggestion. Ben stood moving to his cooking pot where rabbit stew had been simmering since early morning. He ladled it into a wooden bowl he'd carved himself and brought it back to the bedside. The woman stared at him, trying to reconcile this strange situation. A mountain hermit saving her life. A man who looked like he could kill her with his bare hands being surprisingly gentle. "I can feed myself." Ben held out the bowl, watched her hands shake as she reached for it, watched the bowl tip hot stew, threatening to spill across his bare fur blanket. Without a word, he pulled the bowl back, sat on the edge of the bed, and scooped up a spoonful of stew, held it toward her mouth. "Open." There was something in his tone that brooked no argument. Not threatening, just certain. This was how things would be because this was what made sense. Grace opened her mouth. The stew was good. Better than good. Herbs she couldn't identify gave it depth and complexity. The rabbit meat fell apart tender. They sat in silence while he fed her 6 spoonfuls. Then her stomach, empty for too long, rebelled at the sudden influx. She pushed the spoon away gently. "Enough." He nodded and set the bowl aside, picked up a tin cup of water and held it to her lips. She drank gratefully, the cold, clear liquid washing away the taste of blood and fear. When she'd finished, she leaned back against the furs, exhausted from the small effort of eating. Her eyes found the cabin ceiling, rough-hewn logs that spoke of solitary purpose. Then they found him again. "Thank you for saving me." He grunted. Not quite acknowledgement, not quite dismissal. Somewhere between. "What's your name?" she asked. "Benjamin Wolfe. People call me Ben." "I'm Grace, Sister Grace Hartley." He nodded once. Habit gave that away. They sat in silence. The fire crackled. Outside wind moved through the pines. The quiet stretched until she couldn't bear it anymore. "The book. Do you have the book?" Ben reached to his belt and pulled out the ledger. Set it on the small table beside the bed where she could see it. Her whole body relaxed at the sight of it, as if the book's presence mattered more than her own survival. "It's safe," Ben said. "Whatever it is you nearly died for, it's safe." Grace's eyes filled with tears, relief or despair or simple exhaustion. Probably all 3. "They wanted me dead because of what's in there. Reverend Thomas Ashford. He's stealing from the Cherokee people. That ledger proves it. I thought I could get it to the federal marshal in Silverton, but they caught me." Sheriff Drake and his men, they chased me into the forest. Ben listened without interrupting. When she finally fell silent, he asked the only question that mattered. Drake thinks you're dead. I fell 20 feet onto rocks. They heard me fall. They couldn't see me in the dark. Then let them keep thinking it. Dead women are safe women. Grace looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, saw past the wild exterior to something else underneath. Intelligence. Purpose. A man who'd chosen isolation not from fear, but from something deeper. Why are you helping me? She whispered. You don't know me. This isn't your fight. Ben walked to the window, looked out at the mountains that had been his refuge for so long. His answer came quiet, more to himself than to her. Because 7 years ago, I had a friend who needed help, and I ran away, and he died calling my name. I won't do that again. Before Grace could ask what he meant, exhaustion pulled her back down into sleep. Her eyes closed, her breathing deepened. Ben stood by the window, keeping watch, one hand on his rifle. Outside, the sun climbed toward noon. Somewhere in the valley below, men were searching for a body in a book. Let them search. Let them think Sister Grace Hartley had died in that fall. Up here in a cabin, built to shelter one man's guilt, she would heal. And when she was strong enough, they would decide what came next. But first she needed to survive. And Ben Wolf, who'd failed to save his best friend, was going to make damn sure he didn't fail this time. The day wore on. Grace slept. Ben kept watch. And on the small table beside the bed, a leather-bound ledger held secrets that powerful men would kill to keep hidden. The game had changed. Ben just didn't know it yet, but he would, soon enough. Because in the valley below, Reverend Thomas Ashford was learning that Sister Grace's body hadn't been found. And Sheriff Owen Drake was beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, the nun had survived her fall. And if she'd survived, she was still out there somewhere. With the ledger, with the evidence, with the power to destroy everything Ashford had built. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. Grace woke to afternoon light slanting through the cabin window. For a moment, disorientation claimed her. Then memory returned in fragments. The chase, the fall, the scarred mountain man who'd saved her life. She pushed herself upright slowly, testing her body. The headache remained a dull throb behind her eyes. Her ankle sent sharp protests when she shifted weight. But she was alive. Against all odds, she'd survived. Ben sat at his rough-hewn table, the ledger open before him. He was reading it methodically, page by page, his scarred face unreadable in the dim light. Grace watched him for a moment before speaking. How long have I been asleep? 12 hours. It's afternoon now. His voice held no inflection. Statement of fact, nothing more. Grace swung her legs carefully off the bed, keeping weight off the injured ankle. Her torn habit hung in tatters, barely decent. Ben noticed her discomfort and stood moving to a trunk in the corner. He pulled out a wool shirt and leather pants. These will fit better than rags. He set them on the bed and turned his back, giving her privacy. The gesture surprised her. Courtesy from a man who looked like he'd forgotten civilization existed. She changed quickly, wincing, as movement pulled at bruises she hadn't known she had. The pants felt strange after years of skirts, but they were warm and practical. The shirt smelled of pine smoke and leather. When she'd finished, Ben turned back and nodded once, approving her transformation from nun to something more suited for wilderness survival. He gestured to the ledger. Tell me about Reverend Ashford. Grace limped to the table and sat across from him. For the next hour, she laid out everything she'd discovered. How she'd been assigned to clean Ashford's private study. How she'd seen the ledger left open on his desk. How curiosity had led to reading, and reading had led to horror. Ben listened without interrupting, occasionally turning pages to confirm details. When she finished, he sat back and studied her with those gray wolf eyes. You knew what this would mean. Taking this book. Running. I knew. You knew he'd send men to kill you. I knew that too. And you took it anyway. Grace met his gaze steadily. What would you have done? Would you have left it there, let him steal from people who have nothing? Let him destroy Chief Gray Bear's tribe? Ben was quiet for a long moment. Then something that might have been respect flickered across his face. No, I wouldn't have left it. He stood and moved to the fireplace, adding wood to keep the cabin warm. His back to her, he spoke again. During the war, I had a friend, Daniel Cooper, 19 years old. We fought together at Gettysburg. Grace sensed she was about to hear something he'd told no one else. Third day of the battle, Confederate artillery started shelling our position. Daniel and I were in the same trench. A shell landed 10 yards away. The explosion threw me clear and knocked me unconscious. When I woke up, Daniel was screaming. His leg was pinned under a fallen beam. Ben's hands resting on the mantel clenched into fists. He was calling my name, begging me to help him. But the shells were still falling, smoke everywhere, men dying all around us. And I was so afraid, so terrified of dying that I ran, left him there screaming my name. The cabin fell silent except for the fire's crackle. I came back 3 hours later when the shelling stopped. Told myself I'd save him. Told myself maybe he'd survived. Ben turned to face her and Grace saw the raw pain in his eyes. He was still there, still alive. His leg was infected from the filthy wood, but he was breathing. When he saw me, he smiled, like he was glad I'd come back. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Then more shells came. I panicked, grabbed my rifle, started firing blind into the smoke, thought I was shooting at Confederates. Grace's breath caught as she understood where this was going. When the smoke cleared, Daniel had a bullet in his chest, my bullet, from my Springfield rifle. I didn't shoot the enemy, I shot my best friend. "Oh God," Grace whispered. He died in my arms, looking at me, not understanding why the person he trusted most had killed him. And I couldn't explain, couldn't tell him it was an accident, couldn't say anything that mattered. Ben walked back to the table and sat down heavily. 7 years I've lived with that. 7 years hiding on this mountain telling myself I was done with people and their problems. That I'd never care enough to risk that kind of pain again. He looked at the ledger, then at Grace. "But when I found you in those woods, I had a choice. Walk away like I walked away from Daniel. Or this time stay and fight." Grace reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers rough with calluses, tensed at the unexpected contact. "You stayed. You chose to help me." "I did. And now we have to figure out what comes next. Because Drake will realize your body isn't in that ravine. And when he does, he'll come looking." As if summoned by his words, a sound drifted through the cabin walls. Horses, multiple horses, coming closer. Ben moved with liquid speed, grabbing his Winchester and moving to the window. Grace stood, forgetting her injured ankle, and nearly fell. Ben caught her with one arm, steadied her, then pointed to the corner. "Hide, don't make a sound." She obeyed, pressing into the shadows while Ben watched through a gap in the shutters. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. Deputies. Grace recognized Deputy Miller, the young one who'd seemed almost apologetic about hunting her. Miller called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Anyone home? We're looking for a missing woman. Sister Grace from St. Mary's Church. She may be injured or lost." Ben didn't respond. Grace held her breath, praying he'd stay silent. "Reverend Ashford is worried about her," Miller continued. "There's a reward, $500 for anyone who helps find her." $500, more than most men made in a year. Grace felt sick. Ashford was buying her death with money meant for the poor. When no answer came, the deputies conferred among themselves. Finally, the youngest one, Turner, dismounted. "I'll check the cabin. Maybe she's hiding here." Grace's heart hammered. If they forced their way in, if they found her, Ben would have to fight, would have to kill to protect her. And that would bring the full weight of the law down on both of them. Turner was halfway to the door when Grace made her decision. She stepped out of the shadows and opened the door herself. The 3 deputies froze when Grace appeared in the doorway. Turner's hand went to his pistol, then stopped when he saw she was unarmed and injured. Miller found his voice first. "Sister Grace, thank God, everyone thought you were dead." "As you can see, I'm not." Her voice came steady despite the fear coursing through her. Behind her, she could sense Ben's presence, Winchester ready, waiting to see how this played out. "You're hurt," Carson, the 3rd deputy, observed. "You need medical attention. Come back with us. Reverend Ashford will be relieved." "Will he?" Grace took a step forward, favoring her good ankle. "Will he be relieved or disappointed I survived?" The deputies exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I don't understand," Miller said, but his eyes said otherwise. "I think you do. I was there when Ashford gave Sheriff Drake his orders. Make sure she doesn't survive. No witnesses." Those were his exact words. Turner shifted nervously. That's crazy talk, sister. You fell, you hit your head, you're confused. Am I? Then tell me why Ashford is offering $500 for a missing nun. That's more than most families see in a year. Why is finding me worth so much unless I have something he desperately needs back? She let that hang in the air, watched the doubt creep into their faces. The ledger, Carson said quietly. The ledger, Grace confirmed. Proof that your reverend has been stealing from the Cherokee. Proof that he's forged Chief Gray Bear's signature. Proof that he's taken thousands of dollars meant for the poor and pocketed it himself. You're lying, Turner said, but his voice held no conviction. Am I? Then why did he send you to hunt me in the night? Why did Drake say no witnesses? Why does he want me dead so badly? Before any of them could answer, Ben stepped through the doorway. The deputies' horses spooked immediately, smelling predator. The men fought to control their mounts, hands dropping toward weapons. But Ben didn't point his rifle at anyone. He just stood there, massive and scarred, holding the Winchester across his chest. Silent, dangerous, making his position clear without speaking a word. Miller found his voice again. Who are you? The man whose land you're standing on. 4 words, flat, final. Carson's hand touched his pistol grip. Ben's rifle shifted slightly. Not aiming, just ready. The message was clear. Draw that weapon, and this ends badly for everyone. Sister Grace needs to come with us, Miller tried again. Ashford says she stole from the church. And I say Ashford's a thief and a liar, Grace shot back. I have proof, everything documented in his own handwriting. Even if that's true, Carson said carefully, running won't help. The law will find you eventually. Then I'll take my chances with the law. Real law, federal law, not Sheriff Drake and his bought deputies. That stung. Miller flinched visibly. Turner, the youngest and most hot-headed, had heard enough. His hand went for his gun. 2 things happened simultaneously. Ben's Winchester snapped up, aimed at Turner's chest, and arrows whistled through the air, thudding into the earth between the deputies and Ben's cabin. 3 arrows in a perfect line. A warning. Everyone froze. From the tree line emerged 3 Cherokee warriors, faces painted, bows drawn with fresh arrows nocked, moving with the silent grace of men who'd hunted these mountains for generations. The lead warrior stepped forward, tall, lean, roughly Ben's age. His voice carried authority when he spoke in accented English. This is Cherokee land. You have no authority here. Miller's face had gone pale. We're pursuing a fugitive. We have the right to... You have no rights here. The warrior gestured to the east. The boundary is 50 yards that direction. Beyond it, you may do as you please. Here you are trespassers. Carson seemed to be the smartest of the 3. He read the situation clearly. 3 deputies against 1 mountain man with a rifle and 3 Cherokee warriors with bows, and they were in the wrong legally and morally. This isn't over, he said, backing his horse up. Drake will come back, with more men. The Cherokee warrior smiled, and it held no warmth. Let him try. The 3 deputies wheeled their horses and rode away fast. When they disappeared into the forest, the lead warrior lowered his bow and turned to Ben. Stone Wolf, it has been many winters. Ben's stance relaxed, but he didn't lower the rifle yet. Swift Arrow, I'm grateful for the help. Swift Arrow's eyes moved to Grace, studying her with open curiosity and some suspicion. The white woman brings trouble to our lands. This is familiar. It always ends with our people suffering. Grace stepped forward, despite her injured ankle. Chief Gray Bear is being robbed. I have proof. Reverend Ashford forged documents to steal Cherokee land. I'm trying to stop it. Swift Arrow's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. We know. Grace's breath caught. You know. Gray Bear has known for 2 months. We have been waiting, gathering evidence, looking for an ally who could help us fight in the white man's courts. He looked at the ledger visible through the cabin door. And now that ally has come. Swift Arrow led them through the forest on paths only the Cherokee knew. Grace rode behind Ben on his horse, her injured ankle making walking impossible. The 2 other warriors silent as shadows moved ahead and behind, keeping watch. After 2 hours, they emerged into a clearing. The Cherokee settlement spread before them, and it bore no resemblance to the savage camps Grace had heard described in town. 40 structures arranged in careful order. Longhouses and cabins built with skill and care, central fire pits for cooking and gathering, gardens planted with corn beans and squash. Children played under the watchful eyes of elders. Women worked at looms and tanning racks. Men cleaned weapons and sharpened tools. It was a community, organized, thriving, and clearly preparing for conflict. Warriors patrolled the perimeter. Lookouts watched from elevated positions. Everyone moved with purpose and alertness. People stopped to stare as Grace and Ben rode through. Some faces showed curiosity, others hostility. White woman meant trouble, it always had. But Ben, they knew. Grace could see recognition in older faces. Nods exchanged. Respect given grudgingly, but given nonetheless. Swift Arrow led them to the center of the settlement, where an older man sat beside the main fire. Chief Gray Bear, 60 years old, silver hair hanging past his shoulders, face weathered by decades of sun and struggle. But his eyes remained sharp as an eagle's. When he saw Ben, the chief stood. "Stone Wolf, the wolf has come down from his mountain." Ben dismounted and responded in Cherokee, his command of the language surprising Grace. The chief smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern features. Then Gray Bear's attention shifted to Grace. "And you bring the white woman Ashford wants dead." Grace slid carefully from the horse, keeping weight off her bad ankle. "Chief Gray Bear, my name is Grace Hartley. I have evidence of Reverend Ashford's crimes against your people." She held out the ledger. Gray Bear took it, but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he studied her face, reading character as plainly as others read books. "White men make many promises, treaties, agreements, friendship. All lead to betrayal and tears. Why should I trust you? Because I'm not making promises. I'm showing you truth. What you do with it is your choice." The chief studied her a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Good. Come. We will talk." Inside the longhouse, they sat in a circle around the central fire. Gray Bear, Swift Arrow, 4 council elders, Ben and Grace. Gray Bear opened the ledger and began reading slowly. His English was good, taught by missionaries decades before. The more he read, the harder his expression became. Elder Bear Claw, a scarred warrior of 65, spoke first. "The white man's words are always traps. But these are Ashford's own words, condemning himself," Gray Bear replied. "This is not a treaty designed to deceive us. This is confession." He showed the elders the damning pages. Transaction records showing 20,000 paid by the railroad. Only 5,000 reported to the Cherokee. 15,000 stolen. Signatures forged. Bribes paid to Sheriff Drake. Elder Wise Owl, the spiritual leader, asked the crucial question. "Can this stop Ashford?" Grace leaned forward. "With federal authority, yes. This proves fraud involving tribal lands. That makes it a federal crime. A U.S. Marshal can arrest Ashford before the railroad deal closes." "When does the deal close?" Swift Arrow asked. "October 25th, 6 days from now. Representatives from Pacific Western Railroad come to Blackwood Ridge to finalize the sale and transfer funds." Bear Claw's voice held bitterness. "After that, too late. Once papers filed with Federal Land Office, our land is gone forever." Gray Bear closed the ledger carefully. "Which is why we must act now." He looked at Ben and Grace. 2 months ago, when I signed the contract with Ashford, I suspected deception." His hands shook. His translator skipped paragraphs. "He rushed us to sign immediately. I knew it was a trap." "You signed anyway?" Ben asked. "I suspected but had no proof. So I signed and sent Swift Arrow to Silverton to learn English and find a lawyer. We discovered the contract had been changed. Lease became sale. My signature forged on additional documents." Swift Arrow picked up the story, but no lawyer would help. They said one Cherokee's word against a white preacher means nothing. No court would listen. "Now you have physical proof," Grace said. "Ashford's own ledger." "Exactly." Gray Bear's eyes held satisfaction. "This is what we have been waiting for. And this is why Swift Arrow and his warriors were near Stone Wolf's cabin. We knew Drake would search for survivors. We were ready to protect anyone brave enough to steal proof and smart enough to survive." "You were waiting for us," Ben said. "We were waiting for someone like Sister Grace, someone with courage and intelligence." He turned to Grace. "You risked death for people you do not know. That is honor." The council debated strategy for the next hour. Bear Claw wanted to attack Blackwood Ridge directly. Gray Bear counseled patience and legal action. Violence would give federal troops excuse to destroy the tribe. Better to fight with white man's law. Finally, they settled on a plan. Ben and Grace would travel to Silverton, find Marshal Henry Brooks, the federal lawman known for honesty, present evidence, and get Gray Bear's official testimony, then intercept the railroad representatives before the deal could close. Silverton is 2 days' ride, Ben said. Through territory Drake patrols heavily. If they catch us, we will send warriors to provide protection, Swift Arrow offered. No, Gray Bear shook his head. Armed Cherokee riding through white towns causes panic. Gives Drake excuse to call federal troops. You must go small, fast, invisible. When do we leave? Grace asked. Tonight, after dark. The sooner you reach Brooks, the better our chances. The afternoon passed quickly. Cherokee women brought Grace proper traveling clothes. Leather pants, cotton shirt, wool vest, sturdy boots made by Cherokee craftsmen who understood mountain terrain. White Dove, a 70-year-old medicine woman, helped Grace change in a private hut. As Grace pulled on the unfamiliar pants, feeling strange in men's clothing, but recognizing the practicality, White Dove studied her with eyes that had seen 7 decades of life and death. You have changed, not the frightened rabbit who arrived this morning. Grace considered that. I learned that fear and courage can live in the same heart. Wisdom. White Dove paused, then stepped closer, examining Grace's face more carefully. Her gaze dropped to Grace's stomach. You carry life. Grace froze. I don't understand. Inside you, new life. 6 weeks, maybe 7. Early but unmistakable to those who know the signs. Grace's hand went to her stomach instinctively. Shock made her dizzy. That's impossible. I'm a nun. I took vows of chastity. Vows cannot change nature. Grace's mind raced backward. 6 weeks, early September, the night Thomas Brennan had returned from sea. She'd thought he was dead, lost in a storm off Cape Hatteras 2 years before. But he'd walked into her father's forge, alive, weathered, desperate to see her one last time before shipping out again. They'd met in the old miller's cabin at midnight, talked until dawn, let old feelings reignite. One stolen night of passion before he left again. She thought it was goodbye, forever, and then she discovered the ledger, and everything else had driven thoughts of Thomas from her mind. Until now. I can't be pregnant. Not now, not when. White Dove placed a hand on her shoulder. Life comes when it comes, not asking permission. You have choice, accept or fight nature, but nature always wins. Grace sat down heavily on the hut's simple bench. A baby. She was carrying Thomas's child. And Thomas was somewhere at sea, unreachable, not knowing she lived or that she carried his legacy. Should I tell Ben? That is your choice. But if you die on this journey, child dies with you. If I don't go, Ashford wins. The Cherokee lose everything. White Dove studied her with something like approval. You have warrior's heart. But promise me this after the mission, tell Stonewolf. He deserves to know. The baby isn't his. Does not matter. He looks at you like man looks at treasure. He will care. He will protect. Grace nodded slowly, still reeling. I promise. After we stop Ashford, I'll tell him. Meanwhile, Ben worked with Swift Arrow checking weapons and supplies. As they loaded horses with dried meat and water skins, Swift Arrow spoke in Cherokee. You look at her differently than you looked at the world before. Ben responded in the same language. She makes me remember why I wanted to live instead of just survive. Good. A man who only survives is already half dead. Swift Arrow paused. But be careful. The half-alive man is most dangerous when he has something to lose. I've already lost everything once. I'm not afraid. You say that now, but when the moment comes when you must choose between mission and her, what will you choose? Ben didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because he didn't know. They left at sunset when shadows grew long and watching became difficult. 2 Cherokee ponies smaller than regular horses, but sure-footed on mountain trails. Supplies for 3 days. Weapons. The ledger secured in a waterproof pouch at Ben's belt. Gray Bear's final words carried weight. You have 5 days to reach Brooks, convince him, bring him here for testimony, then intercept the railroad representatives. If you miss that deadline, our land vanishes forever. We won't miss it, Ben promised. They rode into darkness, Ben leading, Grace following close. For the first 3 hours, the journey was uneventful. Ben knew trails that avoided main roads, paths only hunters and Cherokee used. They moved in silence because sound carried far in mountain night. Around midnight, they stopped at a small creek to rest the horses. The animals drank while Ben checked their back trail. No sign of pursuit. Grace sat on a fallen log, exhausted but pushing through. Her ankle throbbed. Her head ached. But she didn't complain. Complaining helped nothing. Ben sat beside her, offering dried venison. You're keeping up better than I expected. What did you expect? Collapse, tears, demands to turn back. Grace almost smiled. I want to do all those things. I just won't. They ate in silence, the creek gurgling beside them. Then Grace spoke again. Ben, if we don't make it, if something happens, we'll make it. But if we don't, I want you to know I'm grateful for everything. You gave me something I'd lost. What? Choice. Freedom to choose. My whole life others decided for me. Father decided I'd enter the convent. Church decided what I'd do, say, think. Ashford decided I'd die for knowing too much. She looked at him in the moonlight. But you let me choose, taught me without commanding, and that's the greatest gift anyone's given me. Ben shifted, uncomfortable with emotion after 7 years alone. You saved yourself. I just pointed the direction. You're too modest. Not modest, realistic. I saw strength in you that just needed freeing. They sat quietly, the comfortable silence of people learning to trust each other. After this, Ben said finally, after Ashford's in chains and the Cherokee have their land, what will you do? I don't know. Can't return to the convent. They won't take me back after all this. You have a plan. Maybe go west, California or Oregon. Somewhere I can start over. Ben was quiet for a moment. Or you could stay in the mountains. Cabin has room. Grace's heart skipped. What are you offering? Don't know exactly. Partnership. You teach me better reading and writing. I teach you survival. We figure it out. Ben Wolf, is that a proposal? He looked flustered, caught between hope and embarrassment. No, I mean, I'm not. Grace smiled despite everything. I'll think about it when we're not running for our lives. They mounted up and rode on through the darkness. An hour before dawn, Grace's horse suddenly whinnied, ears pinned back in fear. Ben raised his fist. Stop. Both dismounted silently. Something had spooked the animals. In these mountains, that meant danger. Ben sniffed the air, caught the scent of smoke. Campfire smoke. Fresh. He gestured Grace forward. They crept through the trees until they could see through the branches. 6 men around a fire. Horses picketed nearby, rifles stacked against the log. Drake's deputies, though not Drake himself. Deputy Carson's voice carried clearly in the pre-dawn quiet. Drake says find the mountain man's cabin. The nun has to be there. Turner replied, cabin's 5 miles from here. We hit it at dawn. She won't expect us. Grace breathed in sharply. They were going to attack the cabin. But Ben and Grace weren't there. Cherokee warriors were. If Drake's men attacked and found warriors instead, it would mean bloodshed. Would give Drake excuse to call in more forces, maybe federal troops. We have to warn them, Grace whispered. Can't. That's 3 hours backtracking, and we need to reach Brooks. Then what do we do? Oh. Ben studied the situation, mind working. Then an idea formed. We lead them the wrong direction. Create a trail they'll follow. By the time they realize they've been fooled, too late to attack the cabin. How? I show myself, they chase me. You ride back, warn the Cherokee, then continue to Silverton. If I don't catch up in 24 hours, go on alone. No, we stay together. You're injured. You'll slow me down if I have to run. I won't leave you. You're not leaving. You're completing the mission. His voice was firm. This is the right play. You know it. Grace wanted to argue, but logic won. She nodded reluctantly. 24 hours, then I'm coming to find you. Deal. Ben tied a piece of Grace's torn habit to a tree branch near the trail where the deputies would see it. Then he deliberately broke a stick, made noise from the camp. Turner's head snapped up. There, someone's on the trail. They scrambled for weapons. Ben ran deliberately slow enough they could glimpse him through the trees, fast enough they had to work to keep up. Turner shouted, "That's the mountain man! Get him!" 6 riders gave chase. Grace watched them thunder past, then mounted her horse and rode the opposite direction, back toward Cherokee settlement to warn them. Then on to Silverton. Her last glimpse of Ben showed him disappearing into thick forest, leading Drake's men away from everyone he was trying to protect. Ben knew these mountains better than anyone. He led the deputies through streams that hid tracks, over rocky ground where hooves left no marks, through narrow passages where horses had to go single file. After an hour, he'd taken them 8 miles in the wrong direction. Then he climbed a tall oak, pressed himself against the trunk, and let them pass beneath. They kept riding, thinking he was still ahead. When they were gone, he descended and doubled back. By midday, the deputies would realize they'd been tricked, but by then too late. The cabin was safe, and Ben could track Grace's route to Silverton. Meanwhile, Grace reached Cherokee settlement at dawn, breathless. Drake's men, 6 riders, planning to attack Ben's cabin. Swift Arrow absorbed this quickly. Went how? Dawn, but Ben led them away. Bought us time. Gray Bear stepped forward. Stone Wolf is clever, but now he's alone with 6 men hunting him. He said he'd catch up within 24 hours. Then you must rest 2 hours, then continue to Silverton. We will watch for Stone Wolf and pray he survives. Grace wanted to stay, wanted to wait for Ben, but the mission couldn't wait. October 25th drew closer with every passing hour. 2 hours, she agreed. Then I ride. She did rest, though sleep wouldn't come. Her mind stayed on Ben alone in the wilderness, hunted by men with guns, and on the baby growing inside her, a complication she hadn't asked for but now had to protect. When 2 hours had passed, Grace mounted a fresh horse and rode for Silverton, alone for the first time since this all began. The solitude felt crushing. Grace had grown used to Ben's quiet presence, his steady competence. Now every shadow looked like ambush. Every sound suggested pursuit, but she kept riding, remembering his lessons. Breathe, don't panic, trust your senses, keep moving. By evening, she reached a cave Ben had marked on the map he'd given her. Shelter for the night. She led her horse inside, too cautious to risk a fire that would announce her presence. She ate cold rations and drank water wrapped in blankets against October's chill. Alone in the darkness, thoughts pressed in. Ben somewhere out there, possibly wounded or dead. The baby inside her complicating everything. The mission that couldn't fail without dooming an entire people. She thought about her life 1 month ago. Scrubbing floors at the convent, saying prayers by rote, living small and safe and meaningless. Now she sat in a cave with a bow and arrows, pregnant, and hunted, fighting for justice for people she'd never met. How had life changed so completely? But then she understood. Life hadn't changed. She had changed. Old Grace would have cried and given up and prayed for someone to save her. New Grace checked her weapons, planned tomorrow's route, and slept with one hand on her knife. Next morning, October 22nd, Grace rode into Silverton's outskirts. The town was 3 times Blackwood Ridge's size. 800 people, brick buildings, actual streets. But Drake would have sent word ahead. There might be a warrant for her arrest. She couldn't just ride up to the marshal's office. Too risky. Grace stabled her horse, paying the stable boy extra. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me. The boy pocketed the coins. Haven't seen who? She found Marshal Brooks' house through careful inquiry, keeping her head down and hood up. Small house at the town's edge. She waited until dusk, then approached the back door. Knocked softly. The door opened a crack. A revolver barrel poked through. Behind it, a gray-bearded man with stern features. State your business, or I shoot. Marshal Brooks, my name is Grace Hartley. I have evidence of federal fraud involving Benjamin Wolf in the Cherokee Nation. The marshal's eyes narrowed. Wolf, Ben Wolf from Gettysburg. Yes, he said you were friends. Brooks lowered the gun slightly. Friends is strong, but I know him. Fought beside him in the war. If Ben sent you, get inside. Quickly. Grace slipped through the door. Brooks locked it behind her, pulled curtains closed. Drake has paper out on you. Theft and attempted murder. Both lies to cover Reverend Ashford's crimes. She pulled out the ledger. This is Ashford's personal accounting ledger. Every fraudulent transaction documented in his own handwriting. Brooks took it, carried it to his lamp, began reading. His expression darkened with each page. Mother of God, federal fraud, land theft, forgery, bribery. He looked up at Grace. Where did you get this? Found it in Ashford's office. I was cleaning when I saw it. Read it. Realized he was stealing Cherokee land. When he caught me, he ordered Drake to kill me. And you survived. Ben Wolf found me, saved my life, helped me reach the Cherokee, and now reach you. Where's Wolf now? Last I saw, he was leading Drake's men away so I could get here safely. Brooks's jaw tightened. Typical Wolf. Reckless courage. He did that at Gettysburg, too. Drew enemy fire so others could escape. Did he survive? Every time. Man's too stubborn to die. Brooks closed the ledger. This evidence is solid. With this and Chief Gray Bear's testimony, I can arrest Ashford. But I need official tribal statement first. Makes it federal case. Gray Bear is ready to testify, but the railroad deal closes October 25th, 3 days from now. Then we move fast. I ride to Charleston tomorrow, get emergency authorization from the federal judge. Return the next day. We ride to Cherokee territory, take Gray Bear's statement. Then October 25th, we intercept the railroad representatives and arrest Ashford. Can we do all that in 3 days? We have to. Failure isn't an option. A crash interrupted them, the front door splintering. Ben stumbled through, covered in mud blood, seeping from a shoulder wound and a leg injury. Brooks, you ugly bastard. Brooks grinned despite the situation. Wolf, still getting shot at. They embraced like brothers. Grace ran to Ben. You're hurt. Just scratches. But when he stepped, his limp was pronounced. More than scratches. Brooks examined the wounds quickly. Shoulder was a graze. Thigh had a bullet lodged shallow. He dug it out with a knife while Ben sat stone-faced and silent. Cleaned both wounds with whiskey, bandaged them tight. You'll live, sore for a week, but you'll live. Ben downed a glass of the whiskey. Heard the plan, good. But one change. Grace comes back to Cherokee territory with me. You go to Charleston alone. Why? Because Drake's men are still hunting. If they find Grace here alone, she's vulnerable. With me on Cherokee land, she's safe. Brooks nodded. Makes sense. Grace appreciated being asked this time, not just told. I agree. I want to go with Ben. The next 36 hours passed in careful preparation. Brooks rode to Charleston while Ben and Grace rested at his house, healing and gathering strength. Grace changed Ben's bandages, cleaning the wounds with the herbs Brooks provided. As she worked, Ben watched her with those gray wolf eyes. You've changed since I found you in the ravine. Good change or bad? Stronger change. You're not scared anymore. I'm terrified, but I learned fear doesn't have to stop me. It can push me forward. Who taught you that? You did. Their eyes met and held. Something unspoken passed between them. Grace, after this. After Ashford's locked up and the Cherokee have their land back. My offer still stands. Cabin, mountains, room for you. I remember. And Grace's heart raced. This was the moment to tell him about the baby, about Thomas Brennan, about the complications she carried. But before she could speak, Brooks walked through the door. Got the authorization. Judge Moore signed emergency federal warrant. I have full authority to arrest Ashford and anyone conspiring with him. He held up papers. Now we ride together to Cherokee territory, get Gray Bear's testimony. Then tomorrow, October 25th, we end this. They rode out before dawn, 3 riders heading into the mountains. Brooks with his federal authority, Ben with his knowledge and scars, Grace with her courage in the ledger that would change everything. By afternoon, they reached Cherokee settlement. Gray Bear met them with Swift Arrow and the council elders. Brooks took official testimony. Gray Bear explained how Ashford had lied, how the lease became a sale, how signatures were forged and money stolen. The elders corroborated every detail. Warriors witnessed the statements. Everything documented legally binding, federally sanctioned. As the sun set on October 24th, they had everything they needed. Tomorrow they would ride to Blackwood Ridge, would confront Ashford in front of the railroad representatives, would arrest him publicly with evidence and authority and witnesses. Tomorrow justice would be served. Or they would all die trying. Grace looked at Ben across the fire, his scarred face painted by flames. She still hadn't told him about the baby, about the complication growing inside her. Tomorrow, she promised herself, after Ashford falls, after the Cherokee are safe, after all this is over, tomorrow she would tell him everything. Tonight she would prepare for war. Because tomorrow, October 25th, 1892, everything would change, for better or for worse. One way or another, it would all end tomorrow. Dawn broke over Cherokee territory on October 25th, 1892. The air held that crystalline quality that comes before significant change, before battles, before the kind of moments that divide time into before and after. Benjamin Wolfe stood outside the longhouse checking his Winchester for the third time. His shoulder wound had stiffened overnight, making certain movements painful. The thigh injury sent sharp protests when he put full weight on it, but pain was just information. It told you what was damaged. It didn't tell you to stop. Inside, Marshal Henry Brooks was taking Chief Graybear's official testimony. The process was meticulous, legal binding. Every word recorded by Brooks's deputy, every statement witnessed by tribal elders. This wasn't just conversation. This was evidence that would stand in federal court. Grace emerged from the women's lodge where she'd spent the night. She wore the frontier clothing the Cherokee women had given her. Leather pants, cotton shirt, wool vest, her dark hair tied back with a strip of rawhide. The transformation from nun to warrior woman was complete. She walked to Ben, moving with more confidence despite the ankle that still ached. 7 days since her fall. 7 days since her life had shattered and reformed into something she barely recognized but understood completely. How's the testimony going? Brooks is thorough. Another hour, maybe two. Grace looked toward Blackwood Ridge, visible in the valley below. Smoke rose from the church steeple, from her father's blacksmith forge, from 100 chimneys in a town that had no idea today would change everything. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Are you scared? Ben considered the question honestly. No, I'm done being scared. Spent 7 years afraid of failing again, afraid of caring, afraid of living. Today I'm just ready. Swift Arrow approached, his war paint fresh. 10 Cherokee warriors stood behind him, armed and alert. We ride with you to the edge of town. If Drake's men interfere, we respond. Brooks stepped out of the longhouse, Graybear beside him. Testimony is complete. Chief Graybear has stated under oath everything Ashford did, how he was deceived, how documents were forged, how money was stolen. Brooks held up the ledger. Combined with this evidence, we have an ironclad case: federal fraud, conspiracy, theft involving tribal lands. Ashford will spend the rest of his life in prison. Graybear's voice carried the weight of 60 years of watching his people lose everything piece by piece. My father's father hunted these lands. My father taught me to track here. I taught my son before the white man's war took him from me. This land holds our history, our bones, our souls. He looked at Grace and Ben. You fight for us, though you are not our blood. That is honor beyond words. Grace felt tears threaten but pushed them back. Time for tears later. Now was time for steel. We fight because it's right. That's the only reason we need. As they prepared to ride, Grace pulled Ben aside. White Dove's words haunted her. Tell him. He deserves to know. Ben, there is something I need to say before we go. Something you should know. His gray eyes focused on her completely, giving her his full attention in that way he had. Present. Listening. I'm pregnant. For a moment, Ben's expression didn't change. Then something flickered across his face. Not shock, not anger. Something softer. Concern maybe, or acceptance. How long have you known? White Dove told me 2 days ago. The baby isn't yours. The father was Thomas Brennan, a sailor I knew before the convent. 6 weeks ago, he returned from sea. We thought he died in a storm 2 years before, but he came back, wanted to see me one last time before shipping out again. We had one night together, then he left. I haven't heard from him since. She waited for rejection, for distance, for the walls to go back up. Instead, Ben took her hand. Does the baby change what you want? Your plans after this? I don't know. Everything's complicated now. Not complicated, simple. His voice held certainty. You want to raise this child? Yes. You want help raising it? I... She hesitated. I don't want to trap you into something you don't want. Grace, he stepped closer. 7 years I thought my life was over, that I'd die alone haunted by Daniel's ghost. Then I found you, and you showed me life could start again. Courage could be relearned. He placed his free hand over her stomach, where new life grew. This baby needs a father. You need a partner. I need a reason to be more than a hermit hiding from his past. We need each other. The baby isn't your blood. Blood doesn't make family. Choice makes family. You choose me, I choose you and this child. That's simple. Grace's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. You'd really do that, raise another man's child as your own. I would, I will, if you'll have me. Before she could answer, Brooks called out, time to ride. Ashford's expecting railroad representatives at noon. We need to be there. Grace squeezed Ben's hand. We'll finish this conversation after, when Ashford's in chains and the Cherokee are safe. Deal. They mounted up. Brooks led with 5 federal deputies. Ben and Grace rode beside him. Gray Bear and Swift Arrow followed with 10 Cherokee warriors. An impressive force, enough to make anyone think twice about interfering. As they rode down the mountain toward Blackwood Ridge, Ben found himself thinking about the twist of fate that had brought him here. 7 years ago, he'd have said his life was finished, that he had nothing left to offer anyone. Now he rode toward a confrontation that might kill him, beside a woman carrying another man's child, fighting for people he barely knew. And for the first time in 7 years, he felt completely alive. They split into groups as they neared Blackwood Ridge. Strategy required careful positioning. They couldn't just thunder into town like invaders. Had to be smart, controlled, legal. Brooks and 2 deputies would approach from the main road. Official, visible, the face of federal authority. Ben and 3 deputies would circle to the church's back entrance, cut off escape routes, make sure Ashford couldn't run when things went wrong. Gray Bear, Swift Arrow, and the Cherokee warriors would remain at the town's edge, close enough to respond if needed, far enough to not be provocative. Their very presence sent a message. This wasn't just white man's justice. This was tribal sovereignty being defended. Grace would stay with the Cherokee group until Brooks secured the situation. She'd protested wanting to be there when Ashford saw her alive. But Brooks was right. Too much risk of gunfire. Too much chance of something going wrong. And now she had more than herself to protect. From a hill overlooking town, they watched through Brooks's spyglass. The church square was filling with people. Curious townspeople drawn by the spectacle. A fancy carriage rolled up, polished black with gold trim. Pacific Western Railroad Company emblems on the doors. 2 men in expensive suits stepped out. The taller one had to be Henry Blackstone, the railroad representative. The shorter one was likely his assistant. Reverend Thomas Ashford stood on the church steps, resplendent in his finest robes, his round face flushed with excitement and triumph. This was his moment, the culmination of months of planning and deception. Beside Ashford stood Sheriff Owen Drake, looking uncomfortable in the morning sun. His hand rested on his pistol grip, nervous energy visible even from this distance. Behind them, a dozen townspeople had gathered to witness what they thought would be a celebration. A new era of prosperity, jobs from the railroad, money flowing into Blackwood Ridge. They had no idea what was really about to happen. It's time, Brooks said. He mounted his horse, his deputies flanking him. Ben led his group around the town's perimeter, moving into position. Grace watched through the spyglass, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Everything came down to the next few minutes. Ashford's voice carried across the square, unctuous and false as fool's gold. Good people of Blackwood Ridge, today marks a glorious new chapter for our community. The Pacific Western Railroad has agreed to purchase, I mean lease, land from our Cherokee neighbors for fair compensation. This partnership brings prosperity for all. Henry Blackstone looked uncomfortable, glancing at the documents in his hand. Reverend, the contract clearly states this is a purchase of 2,000 acres for... Yes, legal semantics, Ashford waved dismissively. The important thing is quiz. Opportunity. God's blessings on our town. Blackstone frowned. Before we proceed, federal law requires Chief Gray Bear present to verify indigenous land sales. Where is he? Ashford's confident smile flickered for just a moment. The chief had health issues, couldn't attend, but I have his power of attorney here. Interesting. A new voice cut through the square like a blade. Marshal Henry Brooks stepped through the crowd, his federal badge catching sunlight. 5 deputies spread out behind him, hands near weapons, but not threatening. Yet, the crowd parted instinctively, sensing authority. Ashford's face went from flushed to pale in an instant. Marshal Brooks, what an unexpected pleasure. Brooks climbed the church steps until he stood eye level with the Reverend. Reverend Thomas Ashford, I'm here regarding those land deals you mentioned. I don't understand. Brooks pulled papers from his coat. Reverend Thomas Ashford, I have a federal warrant for your arrest. Charges include fraud, forgery, theft, conspiracy to defraud the federal government, and conspiracy to defraud the Cherokee Nation. The crowd gasped. Shocked murmurs rippled through the assembly. Ashford sputtered, his face reddening again with rage rather than embarrassment. This is outrageous. On what evidence? Brooks pulled out the ledger, holding it high for everyone to see. Your personal accounting ledger, recovered by Sister Grace Hartley. Every illegal transaction documented in your own handwriting. Sale of land for $20,000 with only $5,000 reported. $15,000 stolen. Signatures forged. Bribes paid to Sheriff Drake. More gasps, people looking at each other in confusion and growing anger. Then Grace stepped through the crowd. People who'd known her as the quiet nun who cleaned the church now saw someone transformed, dressed like a frontiersman, moving with confidence born of survival, alive when everyone thought she was dead. Ashford's eyes went wide with something close to terror. You died. You fell. I survived, and I'm here to testify against you. Ashford's careful control shattered like thin ice. You stupid girl, you have no idea what you've done. I built this church, I built this town. Everything you see came from my work. You stole from the poor, Grace said, her voice steady and clear. You forged documents. You tried to have me murdered because I discovered your crimes. Lies. But the crowd's mood was shifting. People remembered grievances, remembered debts they couldn't pay, remembered family members struggling while Ashford lived in comfort. Doc Harrison stepped forward, a respected man in his 60s who'd tended the town's sick for 30 years. You've been bleeding this town dry for years, Ashford. Excessive fees, skimming from charity funds, forcing people into debt, then taking their property when they couldn't pay. Mrs. Martha Jenkins, a widow whose husband had died working on Ashford's projects, added her voice. My husband donated $200 to the charity fund before he died. You told me it went to help poor families, but that ledger says you pocketed it. More voices joined, years of suspicion and quiet resentment finally finding expression. Sheriff Drake still had his pistol half drawn, but his hand trembled, caught between loyalty to Ashford and growing realization that his position was untenable. Brooks stepped closer to Ashford. Come quietly, and this doesn't have to get ugly. But Ashford wasn't listening anymore. His eyes had gone distant, fevered. The careful mask of civility ripped away to reveal something broken underneath. Those Cherokee savages killed my son. They took Joshua from me. He was 17, innocent, good. They murdered him over a land dispute in '75. The crowd went silent. This was new information. Personal, raw. I had every right to take from them what they took from me. Chief Graybear stepped forward from the crowd's edge, his presence commanding immediate attention. Cherokee chief in a white town was rare enough to stop all conversation. Graybear's voice came measured, carrying the weight of decades of grief held with dignity. Your son died in a boundary dispute, a tragic accident caught in crossfire. My own son died that same year, 19 years old, killed protecting a white soldier during your Civil War. He gestured to Ben standing at the back of the church. That soldier, Benjamin Wolfe. I could have hated all white men for my son's death. Could have sought revenge on every white face I saw, but I chose honor over hate, justice over vengeance. Graybear moved closer to Ashford. Grief does not justify evil. You took your pain and made it poison. Hurt innocent people who had nothing to do with your son's death. That dishonors his memory, makes his death meaningless. Ashford's face twisted with rage and anguish. Years of carefully maintained control dissolved. The respected reverend vanished, leaving only a broken man consumed by old grief. You don't understand. None of you understand. They took everything from me. His hand went to his robes, came out holding a small pistol. The crowd scattered. Deputies' hands went to weapons. Ashford grabbed Blackstone's young assistant, a woman in her 20s, pressing the pistol to her head. Stay back, all of you, the woman whimpered, terrified. Brooks raised his hands, placating. Ashford, this makes it worse. Let her go. Let her go so you can arrest me, so I can spend my life in prison while those savages keep land that's rightfully mine. He backed toward the church entrance, dragging his hostage. I'm leaving. If anyone follows, she dies. The deputies couldn't get a clear shot. The woman's body blocked Ashford. Any miss would kill her. Ashford reached the church door, one hand on the handle pistol still pressed to the woman's temple. This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't... Crack. The sound of a rifle shot echoed across the square. Ashford's hand exploded in blood and shattered bone. The pistol fell. He screamed, clutching his mangled hand. The hostage broke free, running to Blackstone's arms. Everyone turned to find the shooter. Ben stood 40 yards away, Winchester still raised, a thin trail of smoke rising from the barrel. His face showed no emotion, just the cold certainty of a man who'd made an impossible shot and knew it. Brooks's deputies surged forward, tackling Ashford before he could recover. They cuffed his hands behind his back, the right one bleeding badly but not life-threatening. Ashford collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Joshua, I did this for you, for justice, for... His words dissolved into incoherent weeping. Brooks stood over him. Reverend Thomas Ashford, you're under federal arrest. You'll be transported to Charleston for trial on charges of fraud, conspiracy, forgery, attempted murder, and kidnapping. You're looking at 20 years minimum. He gestured to his deputies. Get him medical attention for that hand, then put him in the wagon. They hauled Ashford away, still sobbing about his dead son, about justice, about how everyone had betrayed him. The crowd stood in shocked silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Henry Blackstone approached Brooks, still holding his shaken assistant. Marshal, my company paid $20,000 for this land. Where did that money go? Ashford received $20,000. He told Chief Gray, Bear, the sale was only $5,000. He pocketed $15,000. Blackstone turned to Gray, Bear, genuine remorse on his face. Chief, we had no idea about the fraud. We believed this was a legitimate transaction. You were deceived as we were, Gray Bear said. Ashford fooled many people. What happens to the land now? Brooks consulted his papers. The sale is voided. Federal fraud invalidates the transaction. The land returns to Cherokee control. If your company wants to negotiate a legitimate lease in the future, you can work with Chief Gray Bear directly, with lawyers present, with everything transparent and legal. Blackstone nodded slowly. We'll report back to our board. Perhaps we can find an arrangement that benefits everyone. Honestly, this time. He and his assistant climbed into their carriage and departed, leaving behind a town trying to make sense of chaos. As deputies loaded Ashford into a prison wagon, Sheriff Drake stood alone near the church steps. His badge lay on the ground where he'd dropped it. His face showed the weight of choices that had led him here. Grace approached him, surprising herself with the compassion she felt. Sheriff, Drake couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry for everything, for chasing you, for following his orders. I have no excuse. You have a daughter. You were protecting her. Drake's head snapped up. How did you? I know Ashford was blackmailing you, threatening to expose her heritage. That's why you did what you did. Drake's eyes filled with tears as memories flooded back. Sarah, his beautiful daughter with eyes like his and features like her mother. The Cherokee woman he'd loved in secret. The child he'd hidden for 14 years because society would destroy them both if they knew. Ashford found out 5 years ago, Drake said, his voice breaking. Saw Sarah at the creek one day, recognized her mother's features. He came to me that night, said if I didn't do exactly what he wanted, he'd tell everyone. Call her a half-breed, say I dishonored my badge. Sarah would be shunned, taken from me. I couldn't let that happen. Grace's hand tightened on his arm. You were trying to protect your child. I understand that now. But I became a monster doing it, chased you, nearly killed you, all to keep one man's secret. Ashford made you choose between your conscience and your daughter. That's not a fair choice. No parent should face that. Drake looked at her with something like hope. Marshall Brooks said, if I testify fully, immunity, and Sarah stays protected. Is that true? It's true. Brooks gave his word. Sarah's secret dies with Ashford's crimes. Then maybe, Drake's voice cracked, maybe I can be the father she deserves, starting now. Redemption is possible, Grace said gently. My faith taught me that much. You made terrible choices. But you can make better ones starting today. Brooks called out, Drake, I need your full statement. Everything Ashford ordered. Every bribe, every threat. You hold nothing back, you walk free, and Sarah stays protected. Drake straightened, finding some shred of dignity in the wreckage of his life. I'll tell you everything, every single thing. As Drake walked toward Brooks, Grace felt someone beside her. Her father, Robert Hartley, 55 years old, face bruised from Drake's men beating him days before. But alive and whole. Papa. They embraced Grace, burying her face in his shoulder as 7 years of separation melted away. I thought I'd lost you, Robert said, his voice breaking. They said you'd fallen, that you were dead. I almost was, but someone saved me. She pulled back, gestured to Ben, who stood apart from the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention. That's Ben Wolf. Without him, I'd be dead in that ravine. Robert studied the mountain man with a blacksmith's eye for quality and strength. Then I owe him a debt I can never repay. He walked to Ben, extended his hand. Mr. Wolf, thank you for saving my daughter's life. Ben took the hand, careful of his own injuries. She saved herself. I just pointed the direction. Still, Robert's grip was firm. Anything you need, my forge, my skills, they're yours. Ben nodded, accepting the offer with his characteristic economy of words. Appreciated. Robert returned to Grace, studying her transformed appearance with a mixture of pride and sadness. You're not going back to the convent. It wasn't a question. No, I broke my vows, I fought. I carried weapons. I've seen too much. Been too much. They wouldn't take me back even if I wanted to return. And do you want to return? Grace looked at Ben, at the mountains rising behind the town, at the freedom she'd fought so hard to claim. No, never. Robert smiled despite the tears in his eyes. Good, you were never meant for that life. Your mother, God rest her, she was a fighter too. Stubborn, brave. You have her spirit. I thought you'd be ashamed that I failed at the life you chose for me. Ashamed? Robert laughed. My daughter took down a corrupt priest and saved an entire tribe. How could I be anything but proud? Grace felt something break open in her chest, relief, acceptance she'd needed. Papa, there's something else. I'm pregnant. Robert's eyes widened, then softened. The father, Thomas Brennan, the sailor, he came back 6 weeks ago. We thought he died at sea, but he returned, wanted to see me one last time. We had one night together. Then he left again. Robert absorbed this, then nodded slowly. Thomas was a good man. If he'd known, he would have stayed. But he's gone now, so we'll figure it out. Together. You'll always have a home with me if you want it. Actually, Grace glanced at Ben again. I have another option. That evening, after the chaos had settled and Ashford was on his way to Charleston in chains, Grace found Ben at the edge of town. He stood looking up at the mountains, his natural home calling him back. Thinking about running away again, he turned, almost smiled. Thinking about running towards something instead, if the offer still stands. Grace moved beside him. What offer, Tom? You said you'd think about staying, the cabin, the mountains, building something together. She studied his scarred face in the fading light. I'm pregnant with another man's child. You'd really take that on. Already told you, Blawanda doesn't make family, choice does. He faced her fully. Grace, I'm not good with words, not romantic, but I can promise this. I'll protect you. I'll stand beside you. I'll raise this child like it's mine, and I'll love you, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Grace felt tears threaten again, But these were different. Not fear or pain, something warmer. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Really, because I can try to do better if she kissed him. Cut off his words with action, pressing against him despite his injuries. He wrapped his arms around her, carefully mindful of his wounded shoulder, but holding her like she was precious. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace smiled. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll come to your mountain. I'll build a life with you. When, soon, before the baby shows, before the town has more to gossip about, Cherokee Wedding Gray Bear offered to officiate. Perfect. They stood together as darkness fell completely, two broken people who'd found something whole in each other. A week later, the Cherokee settlement hosted a wedding unlike any the tribe had seen. White woman marrying white man on tribal lands officiated by a Cherokee chief, witnessed by two communities learning to trust each other. Grace wore a simple cream-colored dress borrowed from Mrs. Jenkins. Wildflowers woven into her hair. The Cherokee blanket Swift Arrow's wife had gifted her around her shoulders. Ben had trimmed his beard, tied back his hair, wore the cleanest shirt he owned. Still looked more mountain than man, but Grace wouldn't have changed anything about him. The ceremony took place outdoors beside the central fire as the sun set. Robert Hartley stood as Grace's family. Marshall Brooks served as Ben's best man. Cherokee elders witnessed alongside townspeople who'd supported Grace. Chief Graybear spoke in a mixture of Cherokee and English, his words carrying weight earned through decades of wisdom. Marriage is partnership, two people walking separate paths who choose to walk together. Not because they must, because they want. He looked at Ben. Benjamin Wolfe, Stone Wolf. You lived alone many years, thought isolation was safety. Then this woman showed you connection is strength. Then to Grace. Grace Hartley, woman who runs with wolves. You lived in a Pamebon, thought obedience was virtue. Then this man taught you freedom is choice. Now you both choose each other, choose to build life together, choose to raise child together, choose to face whatever comes. Together. To Ben. What do you promise this woman? Ben's voice came steady and sure. I promise to stand with you, fight for you, protect you and our child, and never make you smaller to make myself bigger. To Grace. What do you promise this man? I promise to choose you every day, push you to be better, raise our child to value honor and truth, and never ask you to be someone you're not. Graybear smiled rare and genuine. Then before these people, before the Creator, I name you husband and wife. Your paths are now one. Ben pulled Grace close and kissed her. Not the desperate kiss from before, but something deeper. A promise. A beginning. The assembled people cheered. Cherokee drums began. Food appeared. Dancing started. Robert Hartley pulled Ben aside during the celebration. Take care of my daughter. With my life. Good, because if you hurt her, I know where you live. Ben actually smiled at that. Noted. Grace danced with her father, with Brooks, with Swift Arrow. Ben didn't dance, claiming he'd never learned and wouldn't start now. But Grace dragged him into a clumsy circle anyway, both of them laughing as he stepped on her feet and apologized. As the celebration wound down and stars emerged overhead, Ben and Grace prepared to leave, to ride back to the cabin that would now be their home. Graybear gave them parting gifts, woven baskets, preserved foods, blankets for the coming winter. You are always welcome here, both of you. Thank you, Grace said, for everything, for believing me, for fighting beside us. You gave us back our land, our dignity, our future. The debt is ours, not yours. They rode into the darkness, man and wife, heading toward a mountain cabin that had sheltered one man's grief and would now shelter a family's hope. Benjamin Wolfe, 52 years old now, finished his story as the last light faded from the September sky. His grandson Thomas sat on the porch steps, utterly absorbed, having listened without interruption for hours. So Reverend Ashford went to prison. 20 years federal sentence. He died in his 8th year. Heart attack. Some said guilt killed him. And Sheriff Drake testified, got immunity. Moved to Oregon with his daughter Sarah. Started an honest ranch. Last I heard, Sarah married a good man. Has children of her own now. What about the Cherokee land? Protected. Federal court ruled in Graybear's favor. The tribe negotiated a fair lease with the railroad the following year. Used the money to build a school and hospital. They're still thriving. Thomas thought for a moment. And Grandma, the baby she was carrying. Ben's face softened in a way it only did when he thought of his family. That was your mother, Hannah, born May 1893, our first child. How many children did you and Grandma have? 5 total, Hannah the oldest, then Samuel, Rebecca, Ruth, and Daniel. Uncle Daniel is named after your friend who died. Yes, way to honor his memory, keep his name alive. Do you miss those days, the adventure and fighting? Ben considered carefully. No, I miss nothing, because I learned something important. Real adventure isn't running from bullets. It's waking every day beside the person you love. Raising children, building a life from nothing. That's harder than any fight and more rewarding. Grace stepped onto the porch 43, now hair streaked with gray but eyes still bright with the fire that had first caught his attention. Telling stories again. Old man, the boy needed to know his history. Grace sat beside Ben, taking his hand. Did he tell you about the ledger? Thomas nodded. It's in a museum now. Cherokee Nation Museum, Grace confirmed. Preserved behind glass. Reminder that one person's courage can change the world. Do you ever regret it, leaving the convent? Living on this mountain, Grace looked around at the expanded homestead. Multiple buildings now, children and grandchildren playing in the yard. A life built from choice rather than obligation. Regrets not one. She squeezed Ben's hand. I traded a cage for wilderness, rules for freedom, fear for courage. Best trade I ever made. Thomas stood stretching. Think I'll have adventures like yours. Ben pulled the boy close. You'll have your own adventures, different from ours, but equally important. Just remember what your grandmother and I learned. Courage isn't being fearless. It's being scared and choosing to act anyway. Honor isn't being perfect. It's trying to be better every day. I'll remember. As Thomas went inside to join the family gathering for supper, Ben and Grace sat alone in the gathering darkness. You think he understood? Grace asked. The real meaning of the story. He will, when he's ready, when life tests him and he has to choose between running and standing, he'll remember. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of family inside. Laughter, children playing, the ordinary music of a life well lived. Grace thought about the girl she'd been 15 years ago, scrubbing floors in a convent, too afraid to question anything, living small and safe and meaningless. That girl had died in a ravine and been reborn in a mountain cabin, had learned to shoot and track and survive, had fought corruption and won, had chosen love over fear, and sitting here now watching the stars emerge over mountains she'd learned to call home. Grace understood something fundamental. Freedom wasn't the absence of others, it was the presence of choice. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was possible when brave people stood together. And love wasn't about finding someone without flaws. It was about finding someone whose flaws fit with yours, whose strength complemented your weakness, whose courage inspired your own. Ben had been that for her, and she'd been that for him. 2 broken people who'd made each other whole. Inside, someone called them for supper. The whole family gathered. Hannah and her husband, Samuel and his wife. The twins Rebecca and Ruth with their fiancés. Daniel, the youngest at 20, talking about his plans to become a lawyer and fight for Cherokee rights. Grandchildren running everywhere. Robert Hartley, 70 now, but still strong, carving toys for the little ones. And in the corner, preserved in a glass case, the leather-bound ledger that had started everything. Evidence that courage mattered, that one person standing up could change the world. Ben and Grace walked inside together, leaving the empty porch and the darkening mountains behind. Their story had started with fear and flight, with a chase through dark woods in a fall that should have meant death. It had continued through betrayal and courage, through learning to trust again, through choosing to fight instead of hide. And it had ended here, in a cabin full of love and laughter, in a life built on choices rather than obligations, in a legacy that would outlive them both. The ledger had brought them together, but courage had made them stay, and love had made them whole. Years from now, Thomas would tell his own children about the nun who stole a book and the mountain man who saved her. about the corrupt reverend and the stolen land, about courage and choice, and standing up for what was right even when the cost was high. He would tell them about his grandparents, about how they'd faced evil and won, how they'd built something beautiful from broken pieces. And maybe, just maybe, those children would learn the same lessons. That courage isn't fearless. That honor isn't perfect. That love isn't easy. But all three are worth fighting for. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to run away. Refuse to give up. Refuse to let evil win without a fight. Because that's how the world changes. One brave choice at a time. One person standing up and saying no. One woman running through dark woods with a ledger that proved truth could defeat lies. One man coming down from his mountain because this time he refused to let someone die alone. That was their legacy, and it lived on in every child and grandchild who learned their story. The ledger and the wolf, the nun and the mountain man, two people who changed everything by refusing to accept the way things were and fighting for the way things should be. Their story was over, but the lesson remained, and that was enough.